I'll do that. Y'all do know, never point a laser at anybody. You can blind somebody like that. Okay, I got to get rolling here because I got, it's wild. I don't have as much time as I need today, and I got a long way to go and a short time to get there. But first, I want to thank you all once again for coming out of your warm homes and coming here to try to expand your knowledge and your mind. And also, I'm glad Nick Hoax admitted that he's out of books, because I'm out of books too. With this presentation, I should have a whole pile of our occulted history. And let me point out, when I use the term occulted, I use it in the astronomical sense. When the moon eclipses the sun, it's called an occultation. The moon occults the sun, simply means hidden. In fact, the word occult comes from the Latin meaning hidden. So what we're talking about here is, we're not talking about devil worshipers, zombies, or witches. We're talking about hidden history. And I'm sorry that I don't have any of those books for sale. In fact, I've sold out of everything, but I do have a handful of DVDs left that are on this very program. So if you like what you're seeing here, I want to keep a permanent copy. See my little blonde-haired wife and relieve her of the last of those copies. Okay, we all know the premise that ancient astronauts were on the world. Hang on a minute, I'm not sure this is the right. Yeah, okay, we'll take it from here. The ancient astronaut thing, of course, was started by von Däniken way back in the 70s, and the whole premise is that sometime in our distant past, that the Earth has been visited by extraterrestrials, or at least non-human entities. And the evidence for this is pretty overwhelming. If they got here, the question becomes, are they still here, or did they all leave at some time? A lot of you are probably familiar with the work of Zecharia Sitchin. I attended a conference one time with Sitchin, and I thought I had a legitimate question to ask him, which was, Mr. Sitchin, you know, did they all leave at one point, or are some of them still here? And if, you know, and he would not answer me. In fact, he ran from me. He'd see me coming in the hall, he'd turn around and run the other way. I ended up sitting at a breakfast with him, and he got up and left. And finally, I cornered him at his talk by standing in line, and I asked him the question, you know, did they leave? And if so, at what time did they leave? And he talked and went on for about 15 minutes, and afterwards everybody came up to me and said, he never answered your question, did he? And no, he didn't. And the reason for that is, as I now understand, is that if he had answered truthfully, he would have said, well, they never left, or at least a portion of them are still here. But of course, he didn't dare say that out in a public meeting, because the next question would be, well, then who are they? Where are they? What do they want? And so I'm going to see if I can answer that question for you today. When they landed on the Earth, and according to the Sumerian tablets, which we've already discussed, they colonized the Middle East between the Tigris-Euphrates rivers, which was called at that point by them Eden. Isn't that interesting? Because in the Bible, everything started in the Garden of Eden. Then they grew and they prospered, and they brought kingship to the humans. They appointed certain humans to be their representatives, and this gave rise to kings and lords and most importantly, priests, because they found the two sure methods of controlling the human population was first through religion. God ordained me to be his representative, and he wants you to live like this, you know, and you better do it or God will punish you. So that was quite, and that actually stuck for centuries. At the time of the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church, or the Universal Church, which Catholic means, was the Universal Church. They were it. And they ran not only the lives of the commoners and of everybody, they knew everything. Everybody would go and confess to the village priest. So the church knew everything that was going on. Plus, they were the money lenders. They had all the money and the power, and they were the ones who put kings and queens into position and would loan them money, who would condone their wars, and that's been a control mechanism ever since. This began to fall apart, though, back with the invention of the printing press and the printing of the first Bible by Gutenberg, Johann Gutenberg. In fact, I have a page at my home that was printed on the original Gutenberg press, which is in the basement of the Gutenberg Museum in Mainz, Germany. At that point, the Bible began to be able to reach to everyone. You may not know this, but for about 100 years after the invention of the printing press, the most banned and illegal book was the Bible. You weren't supposed to print the Bible. But of course, obviously, people did, and pretty soon bootleg copies were going around, and pretty soon everybody could read the Bible, and that's when things started breaking up for the universal church. And then we saw the Protestant Reformation, and then we saw, you know, the Protestants break into the Church of Christ and the Baptist and the Methodist, and then on and on and on until today you've got it's all, Christianity's all splintered up. Okay, so the religion control started slipping, and so then they shifted to financial control. Here you can see a broad representation of all the various aspects of the religion. But then they went to money. Whoever, you know, today it's been said that we in this country operate under the golden rule. Whoever has the gold makes the rules. And if you'll think about it, Jesus, the Prince of Peace, okay, what was the one time that he really got violent? Is when he chased the money changers out, okay? The financial people. And where were they? Were they in the banks? No, they were in the temple. So religion and money have been together all the way back. Usury is a term that's pretty much lost its meaning. Most people don't even know what that means. Originally, usury meant charging interest on a loan, any interest, all right? And then, according to the Texas Constitution, it finally, usury meant charging exorbitant interest. And I know when I was a young man starting in the journalism field, it was 6%. If you charged over 6% interest, that was usury, and that was a criminal act under the Texas Constitution. But any of you that are old enough to remember that, you know, slipped, and pretty soon it was 8%, pretty soon it was 10%, and then 12%, and now if you look at your credit cards, you're probably paying 22%, you know, because they went back in and they just deleted that from the Texas Constitution. Now there's no laws against any form of interest, and usury has pretty much lost its meaning. So the question now is, since they were controlling us through religion and money, but are they still here? Are they still with us? Well, check this out. For those of you that are familiar with the Sumerian literature, we know about Enlil and Enki and Narhashub, Marduk, Nergal. Okay, that was the Sumerian pantheon of the Anunnaki, which they just simply referred to as the Anunnaki, which translates those who came from the heavens, landed on the earth. But in the mid-1800s, when those tablets began to be translated, they had no idea of genetics or of atoms or of space travel or even airplane travel. So they just said, oh, well, this is their mythology. And then they followed that all the way through. But notice the similarities. The heavenly father of the Sumerians was Anu. The Egyptians, it's Amun-Ra. In the Greek, it was Kronos. In the Romans, it was Saturn. And then you can see the same thing following through there. The Lord that was in control of the earth was Enlil to the Sumerians, Set to the Egyptians, Zeus to the Greeks, Jupiter to the Romans. The characterization was the same. They're talking about the same bunch. It's just the names changed because of the language differences. The languages changed, but the individual characteristics did not. So were they talking about some creatures or some people that actually existed? And interestingly enough, as y'all know, the original Greek sky gods were called the Titans. All right, in the ancient cuneiform Sumerian tablets, those who live in the heavens is Titan. Again, showing the connection. I was amazed when I started working on Rule by Secrecy and our Occulted History, because I'd been taught about the Egyptians, and I knew a little bit about the Sumerians, and then I also knew about the civilizations of the Babylonians and the Assyrians, the Phoenicians, and I always thought these were all separate civilizations. But folks, this was one de-evolution of one civilization. It started with the Sumerians. And then as that broke apart, it became the Babylonians, and then they split off and it was the Assyrians, and then finally the civilization rose again in ancient Egypt as the Egyptian civilization, which a lot of people still think was the Earth's original civilization, but it wasn't. And so we see as just one slow degrading movement from the great civilization all the way down. We know that the Hebrews, when they were able to flee the bondage in Egypt, they took a lot of wealth with them, and they fought wars for 40 years through the wilderness, conquering one city-state after another, until finally Solomon built his famous temple. And the temple, well, I don't have that slide, but the temple was a huge barn-like building, but the worship place was just a little small room to the back of it. What was the rest of this big building for? It was the treasure that they had gathered, both in gold, silver, precious stones, but also in steels and cylinders and tablets, knowledge handed down from the Anunnaki. In fact, the researchers have found that Solomon's temple is an exact copy of a Sumerian temple dedicated to the god Ninurta. So you can see the connections here between the ancient Sumerians, all the way through the Egyptians, to the Hebrews, and on down. In fact, the knowledge of ancient Sumeria and what led to the creation of the great civilization of Egypt came from the father Abraham, who is not only considered the father of the Hebrews, but also of the Palestinians, also of the Arabs. That's why it's so tragic about all the bloodshed that's going on in the Middle East, because it's not them versus us. These are brothers, these are cousins fighting with each other. You might want to remember that, because if somebody accuses you of being an anti-Semite, you tell them, no, I like Arabs. That'll throw them. Because they have used this anti-Semitic slur against anyone who would criticize the policies of Israel, and yet Semites are the original inhabitants of the Levant and Palestine, and the Palestinians are the Semites. And where did all that knowledge come from? It all came from Abraham. Where did Abraham come from? It says so right in the Bible. He came from Ur of Chaldea. Well, Chaldea was simply an old term for Mesopotamia. Right here. Between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, in what is now the one place on the world that you and I can just freely go travel to, Iraq. And also that means that Abraham was not a Jew. He was a Sumerian, and a well-connected Sumerian at that, because some of the cities of ancient Sumer, Uruk, and Nippur, and these various cities, they were all named after members of Abraham's family. So he was a very prominent Mesopotamian or Sumerian. And he brought the knowledge of the ancient Anunnaki, and then built all this incredible stuff in Egypt. In Egypt, we learn of the Shamanah, the Mufus, the manna, the white powder of gold. We see them here on these steels. We see them over here. Get back. And this was, today we know it as ORME, orbitally rearranged monatomic elements. And what they have found, this is incredible because they have found that, that this is small single atom elements found within heavy metals such as gold, silver, copper, cobalt, nickel, etc., etc. And what is even wilder, that orme is ancient Hebrew for the tree of life. And they have found that they can create this monatomic gold through a smelting process by taking gold and reducing it through this smelting process to a white powder. And yet the powder has anti-gravity properties because when they put it in a scale, the scale weighs 44% less than it did before you put the powder in. And they've been able to take the white powder of gold and been able through a reverse process of changing it back into elements of gold or silver or platinum. So now we're beginning to find out about the basic building blocks of life. In the Bible, when the children of Israel are traveling through the wilderness, they get up in the morning and there'd be this white powder line on the ground, and they'd take it and they'd mold it and mix it with water and make it into little biscuits, and they'd eat it. That's how they sustained themselves for all this time in the wilderness. And they would ask, what is it? And what is it in ancient Hebrew is manna. This was the manna of heaven. And that's interesting because in the 7 steps to the afterlife in the Egyptian theology, the Pharaoh would stop at each station and say, what is it? They didn't know what it was back then, but they knew that it had magical properties. In fact, if you'll read about Moses comes down from the mountain with the 10 commandments and the tables of destiny, and he finds that the children of Israel in his absence have taken all their gold and melted it all down and made a golden calf that they were worshiping. They knew there was something very, very magical about gold. They just didn't quite know what it was. Well, this angered Moses, who threw down the 10 commandments and broke them to pieces. And go back and read carefully. He had to go back up on the mountain and say, Lord, I'm sorry, I broke your commandments. You know, can you give me another copy? And God said, no, you're just going to have to make them up yourself. So when we get the 10 commandments, we're getting just kind of a hand-me-down repeated version of what was originally there. And this could cause problems because I was one time interviewing a Hebrew scholar who, in all seriousness, told me that one of the commandments, one of the ones we know best, is thou shalt not kill. And he said that's actually been a mistranslation. He said the Hebrew word used for kill actually should have been translated as murder. So in other words, this could explain a lot of things. I know I've had a lot of soldiers say, well, I was in the war and I had to kill some people. You know, am I sinful? Am I going to hell? And you know, well, if it says thou shalt not kill, then you got a problem. If it says thou shalt not murder, now there's a nuance to it, okay? If you defend yourself, if you defend your family, or if you defend your country, and you kill somebody in that kind of process, then maybe you're not going against the 10 commandments. So you can see the problem of translations. So anyway, when Moses comes down and finds that they've melted their gold down and made a golden calf, he gets really mad. And it says right there in the Bible that he took the calf which they had made and burned it with fire and ground it to a powder and made the people drink it. Well, obviously, we're not talking about molten gold here, because if you try to make somebody drink molten gold, it'll kill them. No, he created the white powder, the mystical white powder, the nefus. And we now know even where he probably did that, because on the south end of the Sinai Peninsula is Mount Hebron, Horeb, also known as the Mount of Moses. And in 1904, the British archaeologist Sir William Petrie discovered what he calls an Egyptian smelting operation and temple on Mount Horeb. And in his descriptions, he said that when they pulled up the flagstones, what do you think they found under there? A large quantity of white powder. But of course, they didn't know what it was. And so they left it open, and the desert winds blew it all away. So here we have again the connecting piece, connecting modern times all the way back through biblical times, all the way back to the ancient Sumerians and to the Anunnaki of the ancient astronauts. It also now makes us wonder about the Ark of the Covenant, which we've always seen these pictures, you know, where you got 4 or 5 guys carrying it along, and yet in the Bible, if you'll read the description, it gives the dimensions, and particularly of the mercy seat of the lid, and said it was made out of solid gold. If that's the case, then it would weigh almost 3,000 pounds. There's no way that 4 or 5 or even 6 guys could carry that around. So I submit to you that since it's been said that it was filled with the white powder, that it has anti-gravity properties, and so they weren't carrying it, they were just kind of pushing it along because it could almost hover. And we find that the Ark of the Covenant also was said where the voice of God came through, so it's been speculated that this was a light wave superconductor capable of transmitting communications through the Ark of the Covenant, which has been venerated all the way down through the Mason secret societies even today. Here in the upper left, we see the Royal Ark Room of the George Washington Masonic National Memorial in Alexandria, Virginia, and they have a replica of the Ark. In 1147, in this painting of the Knights Templars meeting in Paris, we've got the Ark of the Covenant. So these secrets have been passed down from antiquity to today in these secret societies. And we can see that all of Western civilization has been one mass migration from the cradle of civilization in the Middle East, up north through the Caucasus and through Russia, and then on into Europe, or south through Egypt into Greece, to Rome, to the Merovingians of France, up into the Celts and the Scots in Britain. I was kind of amazed to find out, because I got real interested in the Druids and the Celts, and I found out that they are not native to the British Isles. They all immigrated from the Middle East, from the area of Sumer, or today Iraq. And as they came, they brought this knowledge, this ancient knowledge in various fields. Thomas Vaughan, who went under the name Irenaeus Philalethes, was a 17th century alchemist, and he said the philosopher's stone is nothing but gold digested to the highest degree of purity and subtle fixation of very fine powder. So they were aware of this even through the Middle Ages, and this explains why the alchemists were all messing with gold, trying to turn it into, or take lead and turn it into gold, because they knew gold had properties. And this, again, was knowledge handed down from the ancient astronauts. Oh, I hate to digress, but this is too good. You all know who Francis Bacon was. And it's been alleged that it was Francis Bacon, the illegitimate son of Queen Elizabeth I, who actually wrote the Shakespeare material. He and his invisible college, because they were all connected to the theater there in London, and they wanted to tell people the truth about their history, but they couldn't do it just forthrightly, or they'd lose their head. Just like today, you get in trouble if you try to tell the truth about things, okay? So they wrote them up as plays, and they threw in some funny plays, and then they had some serious plays like Macbeth, okay? And I'm sure the people at that time thought that poor King Donald just, you know, died of natural causes visiting Macbeth's castle, King Duncan. And so, but with the program of Macbeth, they find out that Lady Macbeth and Macbeth poisoned him and then took the throne. So they were putting out information, but in a safe way, because they got a guy named William Shakespeare, and they paid him to put his name on it, even gave him interest in the theater there in England, and he made lots of money, but he was illiterate. And that's why that there is no contemporary writings of William Shakespeare. Now, I'm not the only one who believes that. Mark Twain and some Supreme Court justices and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories, they all believe that Bacon was the author of Shakespeare and was, as a member of the Invisible College, responsible for passing along the underground knowledge, the knowledge of the Anunnaki, the knowledge of the ancient astronauts. Now, I know you might say, well, I don't believe that, but if you want to see a very interesting clue, go to your King James Bible, and that's the Bible that we've all pretty much grown up with and have operated from, and it says right on the cover leaf that says, the Bible according to King James. Well, nobody ever said King James was the Son of God, and besides that, King James didn't even write it. He had 45 scholars that were going through all the old texts and putting together the modern King James version of the Bible. But there was a 46th, okay? The guy that headed it all up, and that was Sir Francis Bacon. And if you want to see, he left behind a little clue for us, go to Psalms 46. And he was great into symbols and secret messages. And in Psalms 46, if you'll count 46 words from the beginning of that psalm, you're going to find the word shake. And if you go 46 words from the end of Psalms 46, you're going to find the word spear. So he gave us a little clue, Shakespeare, that Sir Francis Bacon actually wrote the Shakespeare material and was in charge of the King James Bible. Interesting, huh? Anyway, also what you need to know about is Khazaria. Khazaria was an empire that was between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, and at about the 10th century, it was ruled by Khazarians, and they had a king, sometimes more than one king, and they were in a very advantageous position because they lay on the intersection of the Silk Road, the caravan routes between the Oriental East and the West, Occidental West. And so as a result, they got filthy rich by raiding caravans. But by the 10th century, they had built up an aristocracy and a royalty, and they were going, surely we can do something better than, risk our lives raiding caravans. What can we do? And they decided, hey, we know we're here in the middle of the caravan route. We'll loan money and exchange money and buy and sell money. We use money to make our money. But they had a problem because in the Khazarian Empire, it was about a third Muslim, a third Christian, and a third Jewish. And at that time, both the Muslims and the Christians had declared charging interest on a loan usury and a sin. Excuse me. It was only the Jews who said, well, especially if you're dealing with the Goyim, the non-Jews, it's okay to charge interest. So the king of Khazaria, just like Constantine of the Roman Empire, suddenly declared that he was a Christian, and the whole Roman Empire became a Christian. The kings of Khazaria said, we're Jewish, and they became Jews. And these are the progenitors of the Rothschild family and of other these Ashkenazi Jews, who then, with the breakup with the Khazarian Empire through the Rus came in and changed the name to Russia. And a lot of the Khazarians fled into Eastern Europe, and they were the forerunners of the Rothschilds and of other Jewish people there in Europe. Now, I'm not even going to try to argue whether they were truly believed in Judaism, because let's face it, we're talking three separate things here. You're talking race, religion, and political movement. Race is the Hebrew race, okay, and these are Semites. And you can't discriminate against somebody because of their race. Then you got Judaism, which is the religion. Sammy Davis Jr. converted to Judaism and was a Jew, but he wasn't a Hebrew, was he? All right, and then you got Zionism. Zionism is a political movement that was started by these Eastern European Khazarian Jews in Russia in the late 1800s. And it is a political movement that said we need to carve out a Jewish homeland in the Middle East, and of course that became Israel. All right, now it's not right to discriminate on race, it's not right to discriminate on religion, but now a political movement you ought to be able to comment on and criticize, especially if it gets out of hand. But this is just creating problem after problem. And that's the thing to remember, because the Rothschilds have been, or even been called, the fathers of modern Israel. And even today, they're having all those fights over there and all this stuff going on with them claiming this is their right. And you know who the original opponents were to Zionism? Orthodox Jews, because they said it's not up to us to take away land from somebody. When the Messiah comes, he'll show us where our homeland is. So there's a whole issue there that rarely gets talked about because they've used the Holocaust and they've used the struggles of Israel to hammer us with this charge of anti-Semite if you try even to criticize what Israel does. And of course the Rothschilds built up their own banking empire by old man Meyer Rothschild sending his five sons rather, and they quickly became head of the Bank of England and the Central Bank of Germany, Central Bank in Austria, France, and Italy. And they have played these countries off against each other for maximum profit and control. Now, how does that tie back to ancient astronauts? Because the Rothschilds claim that they are the descendants of Nimrod, the ancient Sumerian god king, who said that his mother was a human, but his father was one of the Anunnaki. So that's interesting too, because it doesn't matter whether you and I want to believe in all this, the point is they do. And that's one of their castles, and there's their shield, and they claim their descendancy from Nimrod. One of the German Zionists was Paul Warburg, and this was the Warburg family were close neighbors and business partners to the Rothschilds. And Paul Warburg then came to the United States and participated in the secret meetings off the Georgia coast on Jekyll Island, where the Federal Reserve was created. And Frank Vanderlip even said that they acted as conspirators. And so then he became, Paul Warburg became head of the Federal Reserve System, the first head of the Fed, and became one of the richest guys in the United States. In fact, any of you old enough to remember one of my favorite comic strips, Little Orphan Annie, and her mentor was Daddy Warbucks, and Daddy Warbucks was a direct takeoff on Paul Warburg. Now, interesting enough, at the time of World War I, Paul Warburg, who had come from Germany, remember, and connected to the Rothschild family, was in charge of the American war effort in World War I. His brother, Max Warburg, was a head of the German Central Bank and was also involved with German intelligence and helped sneak Lenin out of Switzerland and send him on that steel rail car through Germany into Russia to create communism and knock the Russians out of World War I, which then, left it all up to America, Britain, and France to take care of that war. He also was a board member of the Hamburg American Steamship Line, along with Prescott Bush, who in 1942 was prosecuted under the Trading with the Enemies Act for being nothing but a financial front man for Hitler and the Nazis. You might say, well, how come I hadn't heard more about that? Well, it's interesting, but I dug into that, and the reason you didn't hear much about that was that in the summer of 1942, when Prescott Bush undoubtedly knew they were investigating his business dealings with Nazi Germany, he helped create the United Service Organization, the USO. So think about that. There was no way that in the middle of World War II, they were going to come out and announce that the founder of the USO that everybody loved was actually a Nazi agent. So they fined him a few $1 million, slapped his wrist, and swept it under the carpet. So same people were running to both sides of World War I. I told you how that they brought Lenin. Trotsky, the philosophy founder of communism, was working for the Rockefellers in New York, Wall Street, and they sent him and a boatload of revolutionaries to Russia to help create the communist revolution. Woodrow Wilson wrote that the bulk of the money that went from America to Russia at the time of the revolution did not go to the White Russians or the Kerensky government, it went to the Bolsheviks. We created communism. And here in this editorial cartoon from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, in 1911, see, these old folks, they knew the connection. They see Karl Marx shaking hands with Frank Perkins, George Perkins, and Teddy Roosevelt, and Rockefeller, and Dale Carnegie, and they knew that all of these industrialists and these bankers were creating communism, but we don't today. The platform of the communists was basically the same as the Illuminati, and then that was picked up, and it's almost word for word the same platform of the National Socialists or the Nazis. And we see, you can read these for yourself, and you can see that a lot of those are now taking place in the United States. These were some of the men who backed Hitler. What happened here was these people that created communism wanted to create socialism in the East, capitalism in the West, and play them off against each other for maximum control and profit. But communism got out of hand. When Lenin died and Trotsky was killed, Joseph Stalin took over, and they created the International. And now, not only were they setting up socialism in Russia, but they were talking about workers of the world unite. Okay, we're all the working men are going to take over, and well, that struck fear in the hearts of these capitalists and these people who are trying to run the world based on financial and religious grounds. So they had to go into the nearest country that might be able to stop the spread of communism, and that would be Germany. And they found a German army intelligence agent who was being paid to spy on political groups by his military superiors, and he infiltrated a little group called the German Workers' Party, and he went back to his superiors and said, "You're gonna like these guys because they feel like we were stabbed in the back at the Versailles Treaty, and that we actually should have won World War I, and they want to rebuild a strong and powerful Germany." And so the industrialists and the bankers backed this guy, and of course that was Adolf Hitler. He was put into power to act as a block against the spread of communist socialism, and he then changed the name of the German Workers' Party to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. So it was both socialism, but it was Russia was trying to export worldwide socialism, and the Nazis were only interested in national socialism. Well, the same thing happened again. They had created yet another Frankenstein monster. And so now Hitler all of a sudden had overrun all of Europe and was threatening Britain, and we had to round up 26 nations and go to war to stop National Socialism. I'm going to skip on through this. Here, that's just one catch of bags of gold that the Allies stumbled across in Merkers, Germany at the end of the war. They just happened to get this one. Many more just like this were either never discovered or were shipped out of country to Argentina, where Juan Perón helped conceal Nazis, possibly even Hitler and his wife Ava. Under Action Adlerflug, okay? After the invasion of Normandy, the Germans or the Nazis realized that the writing was on the wall, so they started Action Adlerflug, or Operation Eagle Flight, and they took all the money, jewelry, anything worth anything, including patents, licenses, and they shipped them out of Germany, and they set up more than 1,000 corporations worldwide, most of the time headed by a national local, but run by the Nazis. And so the point here is that we beat the German military in World War II, but we didn't defeat the Nazis. We just forced them to move. And they went to Argentina, they went to Egypt, and thousands of them came to the United States under Operation Paperclip, because we were glad to get their rocket scientists so that we could compete with Russia in the Cold War. But we also got their mind control experts and their chemical experts. And unfortunately, we also got their Nazi philosophy. And here you can just see a few of the American companies and German companies that participated in Operation Eagle Flight. John J. McCloy, Alan Dulles, and his brother John Foster Dulles, prior to the war, had worked for Sullivan Cromwell in New York and represented the Schroeder Bank, the Nazis' key bank. So they were working for the Nazis before the war. The head of National City Bank was John J. McCloy, and he oversaw the largest loans of money to the Nazi government And then at the end of the war, he became the High Commissioner of Germany, and he sent all these Nazis over to this country. And his protege, Alan Dulles, had become head of the CIA, and they whitewashed their backgrounds. And this is why the Third Reich went away, and the Fourth Reich began to be built in the United States. So you can see through the rat lines how that the Nazis fled Germany, came here, went to South America. And of course, the church was heavily involved in this, because there was a whole history of pro-Nazism with the Pope, and this was translated into the fact that so many Nazis escaped Europe with Vatican passports. Again, we see the intermingling of religion and power and wealth. In Korea, which you might want to go check out, you know, this was the United Nations versus the communists, and yet if you'll check, you'll find that there were two Russian generals, one operating out of the United Nations headquarters and one operating out of North Korea, and they were actually running that war. So again, we have a war that's being run by the same people at the top. And of course, then we come on down to the Vietnam War, Lyndon Johnson. And if you heard my talk about the Kennedy assassination, you realize that he can be held responsible as an accessory after the fact of the Kennedy assassination. And then, of course, he lied about the Gulf of Tonkin, got us into the Vietnam War, and he was surrounded with his wise men, all of whom were members of the Council on Foreign Relations, a secret society, and that was a sister organization of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, which traced their history back through Cecil Rhodes and his round tables, which was made up of illuminated Freemasons, okay, that had been imbued with the philosophy of the Illuminati. They talked frequently at the early 50s about anti-gravity and how they were developing it and how we were going to have flights into space. And then all of a sudden that went dark, and today you still can't talk seriously about anti-gravity without people laughing and snickering at you, because we are now been told that that can't work, has never worked. And yet, as you can see from this article, from these quotes, they fully expected it to happen in the 1950s. I also might point out, if you'll read my book, The Rise of the Fourth Reich, how that the reason that the Nazis got away with all this and came to this country is because they traded us their nuclear technology in exchange for immunity. At the beginning of 1945, Franklin Roosevelt had been informed that the centrifugal process of enriching uranium was a very slow, tedious process, and we only had enough enriched uranium to construct one uranium bomb. And yet, in May the 14th of 1945, the U-boat, U-234, was taken into captivity after passing unharmed through wartime water. And then on July the 6th, in the U-234 was 50 casks, gold-lined casks of enriched uranium. On July the 16th, we had enough uranium to build a bomb, and they set it off at Alamogordo. It worked, and on that very day, the USS Indianapolis then set sail for Tennessee, arriving on July the 26th. And then about a week later, on August the 6th, they were able to put the big boy bomb together, and they dropped it on Hiroshima, and then a week later they dropped another uranium bomb on Nagasaki. Where did we get all that uranium? We got it from the U-234. It was swapped to us by Nazi Germany in exchange for immunity. They also, as you're well aware now, were working on flying saucers. The only question is, did they have any operational? And I think the answer is yes. But all of that has been deeply hidden. They had the super collider operating in Poland, and they also had the Bell, which was a concentric circles that created a energy field. And then what happened to that? If any of y'all are familiar with the Kecksburg UFO, this walnut-shaped object suddenly appeared in the woods, and they thought it was a UFO, and the US military came in, covered it over, took it out, and said, nothing happened here, folks. And me and others have often wondered if perhaps that was the Nazi bell that traveled through time on an energy field. So we do know that the Nazis had all of this exotic technology. Excuse me. Where did they get it? Well, there's been stories that they got captured flying saucers in North Africa or all over somewhere else, you know, but none of that has ever truly panned out. I think what we'll find the truth of the matter is that going back to the time of World War I, the Germans particularly were interested in the fad at that time, which was spiritualism, where this was early day remote viewing. This was holding seances and trying to contact other worlds. And I think that they probably made it work, and they probably got in contact with non-human intelligences. And early on, these intelligences, hey, these guys want to rework the world. They want to create a peaceful society. They're going to have everybody marching in lockstep, everybody wearing their same uniforms. You know, this looks pretty good. And so they supported the Nazis and gave them advanced technology. But then by the end of the war, I think they calmer heads of the non-human intelligence said, whoa, these guys are getting out of hand, you know, they're killing people, they created a big war, and I think they cut off the flow of information. So we find, though, that all of human history goes back again to Sumeria and to the Sumerian culture. Gilgamesh, the world's first novel, or first story, was about King Gilgamesh of Sumer, and he claimed he too had a human mother but an alien father. And he set out to find his masters or his ancestors. He was thought to be a mythical character until the German scientists in Iraq discovered what they believe is the lost tomb of Gilgamesh. So it turned out that what we thought was a myth was actually real. And so this is really interesting because Saddam Hussein of Iraq believed himself the reincarnated Nebuchadnezzar, and he was trying to rebuild the glory of Baghdad. And so what's the deal with Nebuchadnezzar? Well, Nebuchadnezzar, if you go back and read the book of Daniel, you'll find that he built himself a structure out of gold that has been translated as a fiery furnace, but obviously it wasn't a furnace because people went in and out, although some of his people died trying to deal with it. So he went into Palestine, got 3 Hebrew priests, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, brought them to Babylon and says, I want you to make this work based on the ancient technology. And they said, well, you're not our king, you don't believe in our God, and we're not going to work for you. He said, well, then I'm going to throw you in there, you better make it work or you're going to die. And then read carefully. It doesn't say just pick them up and throw them in the structure. No, first they donned their raiments and their cloaks and their hats. What? What's that got to do with anything? They put on the radiation suits. And they went into this energy field that had been created with Anunnaki technology. And Nebuchadnezzar says, are they in there? Yes, O king, they're in there. Are they still alive? Yes, O king, they're still in there. In fact, there's another one. You put in 3 and now there's 4. 4? Who's the 4th person in there? A son of God. Says so right there in the Bible. And that's the end of that. Who was that? Where did he come from? Did they create a wormhole? Did they create an energy field that could transform in time and space? Well, we don't know. The only thing we know is from the Bible is that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego so impressed Nebuchadnezzar that he put him in charge of Babylon. So there's technology back there that we would like to have. This led to war in Iraq. Unlike normal military tactics, which is you take a weak point of the enemy and you seize it, and then you consolidate your winnings and you move on to your next objective. When we invaded Iraq, we just immediately went to Baghdad, bypassing most of the countryside, which is still causing us trouble. And what happened in Baghdad? The looting of the Iraqi National Museum, where they had just placed newly discovered technologies and scrolls and writing and all kinds of stuff, which probably dates back to the Anunnaki. And the mob attacked the thing, but Colonel Matthew Bogdanos, who investigated the break-in at the Iraqi Museum for General Tommy Frank, said the basement was an inside job, that they bypassed expensive-looking fakes, they had keys to some of the vaults, they knew exactly what they were looking for, and there was thousands of pieces taken out of the basement that have never been returned. We were after the Anunnaki technology, the ancient astronauts. And Herman Goring at Nuremberg pretty well lined it out when he says, of course people don't want war. That's understood, but after all, it's the leaders of the country who determine the policy. It's always a simple matter to drag the people along. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That's easy. All you have to do is tell them they're being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. Does that sound familiar? So in Baghdad, we went straight there, looted the museum, and according to Bagdanos, the basement was an inside job, and they took about 10,000 pieces, and they'd only recovered about 650. It's my understanding from my sources that we did get some of this alien technology, but we don't know how to make it work. So, who got the ancient technology? It was passed along from the mystery schools of Egypt and Greece to Solomon's Temple, and then to the Knights Templars, and then the stonemasons, Rosicrucians, Freemasons, the alchemists, Illuminized Freemasons, to the Round Tables, to the Nazis, to the U.S. military-industrial complex, then to the secret societies of Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, and the Bilderbergers. And that we know about the Council on Foreign Relations, we know about the Trilateral Commission. Isn't it interesting that the Trilateral Commission logo looks suspiciously like a stylized swastika? And it all culminates here, and along with the Bilderbergers, which is the rich and powerful people. And in 2011, a study by the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology studied 43,000 multinational corporations and found that basically they're controlled by 147 interlocking firms, which actually are in turn controlled by about 20 banks with crossover ownership and directorship. Now that is incredibly tight central control over the finances of the world. And they do it through things like the Exchange Stabilization Fund and the Financial Stability Board. And then we also find that, again, if you go back to Rome and Sulla, he founded a college in Rome dedicated to the Egyptian god Isis. So you see the carry on between the ancients and then with Rome. Julius Caesar himself claimed to be, his lineage went to the Aeneas, the father of Romulus and Remus. And then you can read this for yourself. Most of the presidents of the United States can all be tracked back to either King Louis the 16th or Bouillon or Philip of Macedonia. So you've got the same people stemming from these legendary so-called mythological people that track back to the Anunnaki. Every presidential election in America since, and including George Washington in 1789, have been won by the candidate with most British and French royal genes. I got onto this in the selection of 2000 because Burke's Peerage, a very prestigious biographical magazine in England, said that although Al Gore was related to the Windsors, so was the Bush family, but Bush was closer related, so he would get the presidency. And what we now know is that Gore actually won the election, but the recount got stopped and the Supreme Court gave it to George W. Bush. So they were right. Bush, the one who had the closer relationship to the royals of England, got to be president. Well, you might think, that's great. At least we don't have to worry about that with Barack Hussein Obama, but you'd be wrong. Because Dick Cheney's wife, Lynn Cheney, in researching his family, found that Barack Obama is an 8th cousin to the former vice president. According to the Cheneys, Obama is a descendant of Marine Duval, a French Huguenot whose son married the granddaughter of a Richard Cheney who had arrived in Maryland. So Dick Cheney and Obama are related, distant cousins. But if that's not weird enough, according to the Chicago Sun-Times, Obama and Cheney are both blood relations to the Bush family. According to the paper, they're linked to a 17th century Massachusetts couple, Samuel Hinckley and Sarah Sewell. Hinckley is a distant relative of George Herbert Walker Bush's friend, John Warnock Hinckley, Jr., whose son, John Warnock Hinckley, Jr., was the man who shot Reagan. Now, doesn't that start to sound a little incestuous? Are these the same people? Are these the same people who can track their heritage all the way back to the British royalty, to the Anunnaki? And now, we don't know these things because they control the media. These 5 corporations right here control everything you see and hear, except me. And I'm just a conspiracy theorist, so you don't have to worry about me. Here they go, all right? In fact, I would ask right now, don't trust me. Don't believe me. Go check what I'm telling you and find out for yourself, and then it's not a question of you want to believe me, it's a question of you'll know that this is true, and now you begin to find out who's really running the show. So it's great irony today that you're getting told only what they want you to hear and only in the manner and the description that they want you to hear. Interlocking boards of directors, according to the Project Censored, September the 12th, 2009, 2 million people marched on Washington, D.C. Y'all ever remember hearing about that in the news? No, because it wasn't reported. And now we have the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, the National Defense Authorization Act, National Defense Resources Preparedness Order, which says that, by the way, if you're ready for this, if there's a national emergency, which is anything the president wants to sign his name to, could be a trucker strike, could be sunspots, could be a war, could be anything. Guess who's going to be in charge of all the water resources of this country? The Secretary of Defense. It's all lined out in all these papers and all these laws that are sitting here waiting to go. Remember when a police officer used to be in blue and would ride around in his car that had stencil on the side to serve and protect? Today we get black helmeted and jack-booted cops that come around and beat you up and spray you and act like you're a perp until you prove yourself otherwise. And it all started in 9/11. But I could spend the whole time on that. The only thing we know about 9/11 is that 19 hijackers with box cutters hijacked those 4 airliners, except no, we don't even really know that, because all that came from Barbara Olson, who, according to her husband, Ted Olson, who was appointed Solicitor General of the United States by George W. Bush, he got calls from his wife on her cell phone, and she said that her plane had been hijacked and that they were using little box cutters to herd everybody to the back of the plane. The only problem here is in 2006, at the trial of Zachariah, Missouri, the only person ever tried for 9/11, and he was in jail at the time, so he couldn't have participated in that, but he did admit he was a member of Al-Qaeda. The FBI showed up with all the phone records for 9/11, and if you're ready for this, there were no phone calls from Barbara Olson. She tried one that was unconnected. No phone calls, so how do we even know what happened? How do we know that Building 7, which just in that amount of time dropped into its own footprint? How do we know what caused that? It wasn't hit by any airplanes, and they don't want to even talk about that. The 9/11 Commission report, how did they explain the collapse of Building 7? They didn't. They didn't even mention it. John Farmer was the senior counsel to the official Bush-appointed 9/11 Commission, and he wrote that the 9/11 Commission staff discovered that the official version of what had occurred, that is, what the government military officials had told Congress, the Commission, the media, the public about who knew what and when, was almost entirely and inexplicably untrue. So I simply ask you this: if the official version is entirely and inexplicably untrue, then what's unpatriotic about me and others asking, well, what really happened? You have to realize that we're being run from behind the curtain. Prince Philip, who is a member of the wealthy 1%, says that the human population growth is the single most serious threat to survival. At another point, he says, in the event I'm reincarnated, I'd like to return as a deadly virus in order to contribute something to solve overpopulation. Bill Gates, richest guy in the world, he's always going on and on about how we need to vaccinate everybody because we need to take care of overpopulation. Folks, they weren't kidding. They really did. This isn't idle political philosophy. This is self-defense. You better wake up and realize who's doing what to you and start pushing back, or they're going to just see to it that you die. Through eugenics, through vaccines, through GMO food, through water fluoridation, through chemtrails. And this is what's causing the problems today, and it all goes back to the corporate leadership. A handful of corporations with interlocking directorships, and all these people who make up the 1%, as they call them, or the Illuminati, or the New World Order, whatever you want to call them. They're a wealthy elite, and they can be tracked all the way back to the ancient astronauts, and they want you dead. So are we a nation of law, or are we a lawless nation? It's not fascism when we do it. And why would these leaders of corporate America, why would they kill the goose that lays the golden egg? You know, 3 possibilities. This ruling elite is trying to kill us all and trying to take control of the world. They're either trying to contact the ancient creators, the ancient Anunnaki, or 2, they've already in contact with the ancient astronauts and are being guided or controlled by them. Or number 3, they are the Anunnaki, the ancient serpent kings, the ancient creators. Are they just greedy corporatists? Are they simply inept and stupid? Are they merely corrupt malfeasance? Or are they even us? As they would tell you, remain calm, just keep voting the two-party system, pay your taxes, listen to the controlled media, pay no attention to the conspiracy theories and alternative news. And you'll find all of this detail sourced in my book, Our Occulted History, which you can find in any bookstore, or you can go to my website, jimmars.com, or you can go to Amazon. And I don't want to leave you on a downer, so I want to stress that there are more of us than there are of them. If we'll just get our act together, we can prevail. Thank you.